Welcome back to Beyond the Scarlet Moon, where the past never rests and the dead never forget. Tonight, we tell the story of a man whose life was stolen, whose rage became legend, and whose soul was bound in chains of vengeance. This is the tale of the Hammer. But before we begin, if you enjoy spine-chilling stories like this, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Now turn down the lights and listen closely. In the late 1800s, in a small, sun-scorched town where justice was a privilege reserved for the powerful, there lived a man named George Markley. He was a blacksmith by trade, a man of unwavering strength and quiet dignity. His broad shoulders bore the weight of his craft, forging iron and steel with the patience of an artist. But despite his hard work, despite the sweat and blood he poured into his forge, George was never truly accepted by the townspeople. Because George Markley was a black man, and in a town ruled by prejudice and fear, that alone made him a target. One day, a powerful landowner named Nathan Hardesty accused George of theft. There was no proof, no witnesses, just a lie whispered into the ears of those who were all too eager to believe the worst. Nathan was a cruel man, one who saw himself above others, and he hated the fact that George refused to bow before him.
"You best be leaving, Markley. Ain't no place for the likes of you here."
Nathan sneered, his voice oozing with malice. But George refused.
"This is my home,"
he said, his deep voice steady.
"I built my shop with my own hands. My family belongs here just as much as yours does."
That defiance would cost him everything. That night, while George was in his forge, shaping iron beneath the fiery glow of his furnace, they came for his family. A mob of men who had once smiled in his presence, men who had once bought his tools and called him a good worker. They dragged his wife and children from their beds, their screams swallowed by the cold night. When George found them, it was too late. Their bodies hung from the old oak tree at the edge of town, their lifeless eyes frozen in terror. His wife, his children, gone. Something inside George Markley broke that night. The kind-hearted blacksmith who once crafted tools for the townspeople was gone. What remained was a man consumed by rage, sorrow, and vengeance. He tracked down every single one of them, the men who had taken his family, the ones who had stood by and done nothing. And one by one, he made them pay. The first to die was Nathan Hardesty. George found him drunk in his parlor, boasting to his friends about putting that blacksmith in his place. The room fell silent when they saw the hulking figure standing in the doorway, his eyes dark as coal, his massive sledgehammer gripped tightly in his calloused hands. Nathan barely had time to scream before George brought the hammer down upon his skull. The others tried to run. It didn't matter. He found them all. He shattered bones, crushed limbs, painted the walls red with their sins. And when it was done, when the last of them had breathed their final breath, George stood in the center of the blood-soaked floor, his hammer slick with vengeance. But justice was not his to take, not in the eyes of the town. The next morning, another mob formed. This time, George was the hunted. They dragged him from his forge, ignoring his cries for mercy, ignoring the truth of what they had done to him. They tied him to the very same tree where his family had been murdered, and then they took his own hammer and nailed him to it. Railroad spikes driven through his arms, his legs, his chest. Each strike of the hammer sent waves of agony through his body. But George did not scream. He refused to give them the satisfaction. But the worst was yet to come. In a final act of cruelty, they severed his right hand, the very hand that had built, created, and provided for his family. And in its place, they fused his own sledgehammer to the bloody stump. Then they left him there to die. No burial, no final rites, just another warning to those who dare to defy the rules of the wicked. But some spirits do not rest. George Markley became the hammer. His soul, twisted by betrayal and pain, now roams the earth as a spirit of vengeance. His flesh burned away, his hammer hand dripping with the blood of the guilty. When he was alive, he sought only peace and fairness. In death, he is relentless, unforgiving, unstoppable. And if you should ever find yourself alone in the dead of night, listening to the sound of metal dragging against the pavement, beware. It may not be the wind. It may be the hammer. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Scarlet Moon. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more spine-chilling tales of horror, mystery, and the unknown. And remember, justice is not always fair. The next time you hear a hammer strike in the distance, think of George Markley. Think of the hammer, and pray he is not coming for you. Until next time, stay safe.